All right, today we're going to talk about someone who didn't just change his own life, he helped change the course of a nation. I'm talking about Frederick Douglass. His journey from the very bottom of American society to its absolute peak is just one of the most incredible stories of courage and sheer will you'll ever hear. So let's just jump right in with a little trivia. Who do you think was the most photographed American of the entire 19th century? Seriously, take a second. When you picture that era, who pops into your head? Now, if your brain immediately went to someone like Abraham Lincoln or maybe a big-time general like Ulysses S. Grant, that's a great guess, a really common guess, but it's not right. Get this, the answer is Frederick Douglass. Yeah, a man born into slavery. Think about the incredible irony there. He started his life as property, someone who wasn't even supposed to have a name, and he made himself the most visible American of his time. He was deliberately using photography to fight back against all those horrible racist caricatures with his own powerful image. So the big question is, how does that happen? How does someone go from being property to a national icon? Well, it all starts at the beginning. We're going to look at his early years and what he called the path of how a slave was made a man. You know, Douglass's story starts in the bleakest of circumstances. Born into slavery around 1818, his entire world was shaped by cruelty. But then a little crock of light appeared. Around 1826, he's sent to Baltimore, and his mistress, Sophia Old, starts teaching him his ABCs. Of course, her husband finds out and forbids it, so to crush that spark, they send him to a man named Edward Covey, a professional slave breaker. But it backfires. Instead of being broken, Douglass has this pivotal moment in 1834, and that sets him on the path to finally escape to the North a few years later. And this right here, this quote is the key to everything. When his master, Hugh Auld, yelled that learning would unfit him to be a slave, it was supposed to be a threat. But for Douglass, it was like a light bulb went off. He realized, oh my God, he's right. He saw that reading and writing wasn't just a skill, it was the direct pathway out of bondage. So after they found out he was learning to read, they sent him to this guy, Covey. And we really need to understand what a slave breaker was. This wasn't just a tough boss. Their entire job was to use nonstop, brutal violence, both physical and psychological, to completely shatter a person's will to resist. It was about extinguishing any hope they had, and Douglass had to endure that for a full year. And this is the moment. This is the turning point. After one beating too many, the 16-year-old Douglass decides he's had enough. He fights back, and for 2 straight hours he goes toe-to-toe with Covey, and he wins. Covey never touched him again. For Douglass, this was everything. It wasn't just about winning a fight, it was about reclaiming his own soul, his own humanity. Okay, so he's reclaimed his spirit, and soon after, he escapes to freedom in the North. But Douglass wasn't the kind of person to just enjoy his own freedom quietly. No way. He immediately picked up the very weapon his old master was so terrified of, the written word. His first book, his autobiography, comes out in 1845, and it is a massive hit. It's so well written, in fact, that a lot of white people just refuse to believe a formerly enslaved person could have written it. And that book, along with the abolitionist newspaper he started called The North Star, became his primary weapons. They were living, breathing proof that the racist justifications for slavery were a complete lie. And just look at the motto for his newspaper. Right is of no sex. Truth is of no color. God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. I mean, just think about that for a second. This wasn't just about freeing black men. Right from the get-go, his fight was for universal human rights, a vision of equality that was way, way ahead of his time. But Douglass wasn't just a writer. He became one of the most famous public speakers of his day. He was basically the traveling conscience of America, and his message could be boiled down to one word: agitate. This line comes from maybe his most famous speech ever. Picture this. It's 1852, and an anti-slavery group asks him to give a 4th of July speech. And instead of playing nice and celebrating, he just unloads. He uses the country's own founding ideals of freedom and liberty to call out its staggering hypocrisy. It was absolutely explosive. You know, it's easy to think of the abolitionist movement as this one unified thing, but it wasn't. There were huge arguments about strategy. Douglass's old mentor, William Lloyd Garrison, thought the Constitution was fundamentally a pro-slavery document and that the free states should just leave the Union. But Douglass's thinking changed over time. He came to believe, no, the principles in the Constitution are good. We can use them against slavery.
He argued for saving the Union and forcing it to live up to its own promises. That's a really important shift, not to tear the system down, but to hijack it for the cause of freedom. And that belief in universal rights, he lived it. In 1848, he was the only African-American man to go to the Seneca Falls Convention, the first big women's rights meeting. When it looked like the proposal for women's right to vote was going to fail, Douglas got up and gave this incredibly passionate speech that helps turn the tide. He just got it. You can't pick and choose who gets justice. It's for everyone or it's for no one. So in the last part of his life, Douglas makes another transformation. He goes from being the agitator on the outside to a statesman on the inside, becoming an advisor to presidents and really a national symbol for the struggle for equality. When the Civil War breaks out, Douglas is on it. First, he's constantly in President Lincoln's ear, pushing him to make the war about ending slavery, not just preserving the country. Then he becomes a key recruiter for the Union Army, convincing black men to fight for their own freedom. And his own two sons were some of the first to sign up. He even goes to the White House to meet with Lincoln and demand equal pay and treatment for these black soldiers. He was just relentless. You know, Douglas's opinion on Lincoln wasn't simple. He was often frustrated with how slow Lincoln was to embrace emancipation. But in the end, he judged Lincoln not as an activist, but as a president trying to hold a shattered country together. And from that perspective, he came to see that Lincoln had actually acted with incredible boldness and determination. And in 1895, Frederick Douglass dies. Just think about that journey. 77 years. From a slave cabin in Maryland, where he wasn't even considered a full human being, to becoming one of the most famous and respected men in the entire country. And his story is far from over. His legacy is alive and well today. You can visit his home in Washington, D.C. There are volunteers right now, online, transcribing his thousands of letters, uncovering new things about him all the time. He has statues all over, including one in the U.S. Capitol, and of course, there are the photographs. That conscious decision he made to use his own image to define his own humanity and fight back against hate. So let's end on this. Not long before he died, a young man asked him for some parting advice. Douglas gave him just 3 words: agitate, agitate, agitate. It's such a powerful and urgent message. So it makes you wonder, right? What are the things today that should make us agitate?